will begin with the Diamond Jubilee Oration, and I request our Dean Academic, Dr. Kaushal Verma, to please join us on the dais, and our esteemed guest and speaker of this session, Dr. Shitij Kapur. Please welcome them with a loud round of applause. I request Dean Sir to please welcome Dr. Shitij.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to this AIIMS Diamond Jubilee Oration. You might have already known that this is one of the most prestigious orations which AIIMS grants to a very eminent scientists from India or abroad for their outstanding contribution, again in this field of science and also contribution towards society. And the previous 10 years by guidelines is the work that is considered for granting the oration. And again, as in the past, this has been done by very eminent people like Dr. Bhan, Dr. Venkat Narayan, and last year our own Dr. Paul did the honor of doing this oration. This year, we thought to invite our own alumnus, Dr. Shitij Kapur, who is the Vice Chancellor, King's College, London, and also the President of that college, who will deliver this oration on the miracles of modern medicine and the future of global health, lessons from career across 4 continents. So you can imagine what he is bringing to the institute now. Just about a word about Shitij. Shitij is our own institute graduate. He joined MBBS course in 1982, 3 years after our batch, and left soon after completing the MBBS course. He chose to pursue psychiatry as his career. He did his master's in psychiatry from University of Pittsburgh, and then moved on to do the PhD from University of Toronto as a neuroscientist and psychiatrist. And he devoted his career to improving the understanding and treatment of schizophrenia using brain imaging and clinical research. And now he has over 350 publications which have been cited over 70,000 times. So you can imagine the impact of work that he has and which has influenced the clinical practice, the guidelines, and he claimed an H-index of over 125. These contributions have been acknowledged with a distinguished fellowship of American Psychiatry Association as fellowship of Academy of Medical Sciences of UK and Australia, and honorary doctorate from University of Copenhagen. Since mid-20s, Shitij has taken an increasingly senior roles in the academic leadership, first as Vice President of Research at the Center of Addiction and Mental Health, University of Toronto. This was between 2003 and 7. Then an Executive Dean of the University of Psychiatry, Psychology and Neurosciences, and an Assistant Principal, Academic Performance at King's College London between 2007 and 16. And then he served as the Dean and Assistant Vice Chancellor Health of Faculty of Medicine, Dentistry and Health Sciences at the University of Melbourne, and played a very active role in Australia's response to COVID-19 pandemic at that time. And in fact, he was the co-chair of a task force which university constituted at that time to design the roadmap for recovery for the nation from the COVID at that moment of time. And 21, he moved back to King's College London as President and Vice Chancellor. This has been one of our brightest students, which AIIMS has produced, and I'm very proud of that. And I have profound personal, say, liking for him, not because of his intellect and the iconic persona that he has, but as a person, he has been full of nobility, humanity, humbleness, and dedication. So we thought to invite him for this prestigious oration, which the Institute awards to a person who is of this eminence and this caliber. So welcome Shitij to the Institute, and I'm glad that you accepted the invitation and agreed to come all the way from London. This is a brief. I mean, I could do it for many hours describing Shitij because we have interacted very closely for 6 years, but I'm seeing him now after a very, very long time. But anyway, we're glad that yes, you could make it. Thank you for joining, and thank you. Over to Shitij for the oration now.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Varma. What kind words? I can't quite recognize the person you talk about, but thank you very much. Thank you so much, Director Srinivas. What a privilege it is to be here. But I think I should start that privilege by thanking you, the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, because this is what it looked like in 1982 when I was fortunate enough to stand out there in the garden. And I can't tell you how proud I was to be selected to join what I thought was an incredible set of colleagues. So this is what they looked like. That's the batch of 92. And there were only two of us who knew how to wear a tie. One was Professor Yogesh Jain, who's here now, and the other is Professor Alok Thakkar, who's also here now. And I think it's a funny coincidence that all three of us are on your program today. But look, my thanks to AIIMS has to go for the incredible experience that you as an institution and you as my professors provided me. And I want the students to know that I've been across 4 continents. And if I were given an opportunity to join a medical school again, I would come back to AIIMS because it is just an incredible experience. And, you know, for a young medical student in those days to be allowed to work in the ICU and then in the next semester go to Ballabgarh was really a remarkable experience. I did not know at that time how it was shaping me because one doesn't know those things when they happen. But it absolutely did. But look, it wasn't just that. Spent a lot of time in the library, but I think even more formative, I have to say, was the cafeteria. Looks almost like this, not exactly. But perhaps a part of that education were actually the strikes. And I can see, you know, I was there in that checkered sweater and Yogesh Jain was next to me and many of us were there. I don't know if it really changed the fate of the nation, but it did leave an impact on us. But look, finally, after 5 years, standing at that spot, not about 7 meters from where I am today, I had the privilege of leaving. But I think one of the most enduring impacts of my time here was the opportunity and privilege of research as an undergraduate. I was very fortunate to be one of the few who got some funds to do it. I was really pleased, Professor Makaria, to learn that 18 undergraduates this year received support and mentorship. And these were my mentors, Professor Pandab and Professor Karmarkar. And what they allowed me to do, they had an ongoing project that was funded to study ionization of salt that Yogesh talked about. And I had the opportunity to go and study at one level out there in Nepal and the other areas, the distribution of salt, which was a challenge. But then to come in Professor Kochupilay's lab and do radioimmunoassays of, you know, T3. It was that combination of experiences, that breadth of science that I think was very unique. What that allowed me to do was to take a journey around the world. And since Professor Varma has very kindly talked about this journey, I will not repeat it. The first bit of that journey was focused on my primary academic interest. I trained as a psychiatrist, then I did a PhD in brain science, then I did a fellowship on how you image the brain, and I devoted my time for about 15 years to figure out how drugs work in the brain. Now, you have to go back in time and see that when we started looking at this question, which was in the early 1990s, there were no really good techniques to image the brain. You could do a CT scan of the brain. The MRIs were just emerging. And PET scanning had not as yet become a clinical tool. So I had the opportunity to be at the cutting edge. I was in the right universities where it was happening. And we were able to develop some of the early ways to image the dopamine system in a living person. And that became my life's work for 15 years. And it took me 15 years to do it, but I can show it to you in a slide. And that's basically the lesson of it. So what we were able to do, as you can see in the center, is an MRI scan that gives you a sense of the structure of the brain. On the left, you're looking at a raclopride PET scan. It actually gives you the pictures of the dopamine, particularly the dopamine D2 receptor distribution in the brain. And if you look at that distribution, to you it just must be a bunch of yellow colors in a red, blue brain. But that is actually a reasonably normal distribution. There is nothing wrong with that distribution, even though it's a patient with schizophrenia. And that is important because at that point in time, the theory was that there was something significantly abnormal in the dopamine system of patients. And when we saw this, I have to say it was a disappointment because what we were looking for, it'll be bright red and screaming, it wasn't. But what it did tell us is that took a very low dose of haloperidol, which was the medication that was being used to treat, to cause a profound block of that dopamine system. And we could measure it, we could give it a precise number, we could see how it changed when you gave the drug, we could see when did the benefits start arriving. We could also see that if you blocked more than 80% of the receptors, you got Parkinsonian symptoms and side effects. And what that also told us is, and through a lot of work that we did, that if you didn't block about 60% of the receptors, you did not get a clinical response. If you blocked more than 80% of the receptors, you actually started getting Parkinsonian side effects. And the real range in terms of the medication on that was the difference between 2 milligrams of haloperidol versus 3 milligrams of haloperidol. A very narrow therapeutic window. The problem was one patient blocks 70% at 2 milligrams, the other patient blocks 70% at 5 milligrams. So it really told us how difficult it was to dose these medications right. And that is why these medications were not as popular and patients didn't quite like them. So look, a lot of time was spent on improving the guidelines. A lot of time was in using this to develop new kinds of medications. And it was a very satisfying period of work. But of course, I'd gone into this thinking, we'll develop a new diagnostic test for schizophrenia. Has to be conceded, we've failed. We still don't have a new diagnostic test of schizophrenia 40 years later. And my second hope was that we will use this information to guide the treatment of an individual patient. Sadly, that still doesn't happen because one, the information isn't as precise, and secondly, it's too costly. And it's easier now because the medications have much wider therapeutic windows, so you don't have to actually find them. But while I was doing this, there was a miracle happening in medicine around me. It didn't happen much in psychiatry, though it's coming. And I would say that the trinity at the heart of those miracles was the development of these three different technological ideas and technologies in medicine. The progress in molecular genetics, the development of biologics as therapeutics, and the place of imaging and devices in the practice of modern medicine. And I think 40 years from where I was standing there graduating in 1982 to today, these three things have deeply changed the reality of modern medicine. What did it look like? Well, when I was here, the idea of actually sequencing a gene was not really possible. We knew there were genes. We knew exactly what their structure ought to be and how it ought to be, but you couldn't really sequence them. And it wasn't really till 2000. It is surprising that the first news came in the New York Times, and it's only later that it actually came out in Nature and Science that the human genome got published. And many of the students now who probably read this in their textbooks don't realize that there was a time when actually the world wasn't quite like this. We did not know this was possible. There were debates about the total number of genes there were, but of course, this has gotten to settle it. But it wasn't just a genetic revolution. Largely all treatments at that point in time were essentially large molecules. And what came with this was the biologics. Now, at that point in time, when I was in medical school, I knew that recombinant insulin had come. And we had the great Professor Bajaj, and we were forced to do rounds with him, which were terrifying events to be on a round with Professor Bajaj. But he would tell us about how this recombinant insulin and recombinant erythropoietin were coming. But it wasn't until I left medical school that actually we started getting monoclonal antibodies. And now, of course, if you look back 40 years, some of the bigger advances have been in the different kind of monoclonal antibodies. But the one that most affected my life was, of course, imaging. And when I joined AIIMS, there wasn't a CT scanner, even though there was a Professor Bhargav. But then through her work, we actually got the first CT scanners. And by the time I left, for I remember this, there was the preparation for the big MRI to come. And I would guess you now have a dozen MRIs all over the place. But this is what it looked like when I was graduating. This is actually Hamburg. This is where the first MRI by Siemens was installed. And this was actually the first MRI picture published of. Now, I know there are professors of radiology here who are looking at that, and I'm wondering, what is it? Actually, a Shimla mirch. It's a green bell pepper, which was the first. You can actually see the green bell pepper now. But look, these imaging devices, all of this come together, has fundamentally changed modern medicine. From a student graduating in 1988 to a student graduating in 2025, the big difference you see is because of these three. And how big has that difference been? So today, if you go to DisGenet, which is the world's largest center to figure out disease gene associations, I just want to draw your eyes to one number. There are 2 million gene disease associations. You can't even make MCQs of that number of these. You know, in my time, there were a few that would know, and you could learn them by heart. There are now 2 million. Even the geneticists don't know them. This does not mean we know what to do with them. This does not mean that we have treatments anywhere close for all of these, but clearly the scope and scale at which our understanding is changing is absolutely remarkable. But it's not just that. I think this very business of translational medicine has really made it possible to translate this kind of science into cures in a single patient. And everyone has their own favorite example, but I'll give you one because Professor K.K. Verma is here, so I wanted him to see a dermatology example. But this is someone with alopecia areata. So in this single patient, they were able to do the genetic analysis and the immune analysis and find out that it was a problem with cytotoxic T lymphocytes. Now, they didn't go around making a special treatment for this, but they knew that there was an existing treatment. So they were able to map the pathway. They were able to identify all of these 3 abnormalities, and they knew that there was an existing antibody that directed against this should help. They gave this patient the antibody. This is what it looked like. And then they were able to, because it's an easy part of the world to do histopathology in, actually track over the weeks how the person improved, how the cytotoxic lymphocytes changed, how the hair came back. So this just seems like the picture-perfect boutique story of using genetics, using biological therapies to actually change someone's clinical condition. We're doing it not just at the level of a single patient. The other similar great development is the treatment of hepatitis C, and this came around when I was in Australia. And in Australia, we were able to actually launch a national program. It's a small country. It's a well-off country. It can give this to all its citizens. And with the ambition, this started in 2016, that hepatitis C will be eradicated in Australia by 2026. And they're pretty much on course. It won't get eradicated because there are a number of new immigrants that come and things like that. But nonetheless, that gives you the scope and scale. You could not have imagined that someone could make a statement like this in 2015, and now it is almost partially true. So these to me are just the amazing miracles. And of course, finally, it's the miracle that all of us face. So March 2020, I don't know what your date was, but I was in Melbourne in Australia. It was the 23rd of March when it actually came, when we realized, we thought this was something happening in China. Then we thought, okay, a few air travelers will have it. And then by the 21st to 23rd of March, we had to close our institute and run in a totally different way. But by the end of the year, we had the first peer-reviewed results. This is nothing short of a miracle. And not only were these the traditional sort of Oxford vaccines, but also the new RNA-based vaccines that were available and tested in that short period of time. And I think it is a victory that should give us hope and inspiration that within 12 months, 4.5 billion people around the world at least got one dose of some vaccine. Something of this scale in health, the world has never seen before. And I really do think this is a miracle. And of course, India, the institute itself, was absolutely central to this. So there are many challenges in this world, but I think we should celebrate where celebration is due. And I would say, yes, it could have been done better. And indeed, there are many things that went wrong in the COVID policy. But certainly this aspect has to be. And the one that's very close to my heart, because it's close to what I do, is Professor Takahashi, who almost brought these three revolutions together. And that is his treatments of induced pluripotent stem cells in patients with Parkinson's disease. Now, mind you, he's a neurosurgeon. But working with geneticists, they were able to develop these treatments where they took the iPS cells extracted from the patient, sorted them, grew them further, differentiated them into dopamine cells, injected them under stereotaxic guidance at the right place in the individual patient, and were able to create some level of clinical improvement. Not a cure, but some level of clinical improvement, and it's a world first. So wonderful. Miracles happening at an individual level, miracles happening at a population level, and also miracles happening at home. So now, I don't know if it's available to you over here, but if you were in the US, you can, for 99 pounds, now actually go and bring this miracle home. You can sign up to 23andMe. So this is a genetic testing service. They send you a test tube home. You do a little salivary swab. You put the thing back. You put it in the mailbox. It goes. And then after a few days, you actually get a report. You get a report of your extensive genome screen. It tells you a lot of things here. This, by the way, happens to be my report, but don't worry, I won't share anything you don't want to know. But it gives you advice on your health. It found me 1,007 DNA relatives. I mean, I do have a few relatives, but I did not know I had 1,007 DNA relatives. And they actually are. They are, I think, eighth removed. And if you just do the mathematics, all of us have several thousand eighth removed relatives. It's just that usually, they have to do the DNA test. Only then can that be linked to mine. But it was quite a scary thought. It did give me the opportunity to connect with them, but I thought I can't connect with my real relatives. So rather than going out to more DNA relatives, that wouldn't be a good idea. But the last thing, and this poses an interesting dilemma, is that it offers me the opportunity to see if I have a risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease, if I have a risk for Parkinson's disease, or whether I have a risk for breast cancer. Now, they're wise in that this just doesn't pop up on your email to say you have a risk for. You have to actually sign a special disclaimer in your own account and then click a few extra boxes if you want to actually know what information they have. And you'll all have to make your own decisions. I've actually not done that. So it's sitting in my inbox because I could not think it through as to what would I do if I found out what it has to tell me. So it's an interesting time where we are, where there are these miracles of science happening. There are these very interesting, complex dilemmas that are coming up. And then there is something else that's interesting that's happening. So this is one of those, government documents that you usually don't care about. It is the NCHS data brief. I'm sure there's an Indian version of it. But it had something very interesting in it. It said life expectancy for the US population in 2015 was 78.8 years, a decrease of 0.1 year. Well, these are these statistical things. Sometimes they go up, down, clearly. So people were puzzled. Well, let's watch what happens next year. Goes down 2 years in a row. Now, this is a little puzzling. This is United States, the mecca of modern medicine. All of these miracles that I'm talking about, most of these have come out of US labs or US industry. And then, 2 years. Third year in a row. It is a fact. Life expectancy in the United States, as we usually measure life expectancy, is going down. And, well, maybe it's just the United States. This is UK. Now, this is 2017. Rise in life expectancy has stalled. Okay, rise in life expectancy is when it was going up, it's plateaued. A few years later, life expectancy is cut. And you might say, well, these are just health scientists and these, population health scientists, they do these things. But I'll tell you, stuff is really serious when insurance companies start changing. So Legal & General is one of our biggest insurance company, and it was giving back 433 million because actually its calculations said, we've been holding all of this money in pension funds because people were going to give this long. We know now they're not going to live long enough. And so I show that this is for real. This is not an artifact happening in one Western country. So despite all these major advances that I've just shared with you, the public picture of health is beginning to look different. And of course, the country between the continents where I've lived that has the highest life expectancy is Australia. So the US is around 78, UK is 79, 80, Australia is 83. It's the sunshine, it's whatever it is. And you can see how that life expectancy became what it did. It had risen since 1950s. And what you could start seeing, even as Australia, if you look in the end and if you look at males, it has actually plateaued and it's going down. Women, fortunately, in all countries, including these, have a higher life expectancy. And particularly if you take out maternal mortality, they definitely have higher life expectancy. So this is a challenge as much as it is a lesson. And of course, we all pine for the US healthcare system. It's important to realize that the US healthcare system is now the world's third largest economy. The world's largest economy is the US economy. The second largest economy is China. The third largest economy is the US healthcare system. The US healthcare system is an economy bigger than India. It's also bigger than Germany, by the way. It's also bigger than Japan. So that should give us some sense of the scale of expense that these modern miracles have meant. But they should also give you a cautionary tale. That is the rise in life expectancy. As you can see, it's going down in the United States against expense. And that's the rest of the countries. So it is possible in much of the West to live much, much longer in other countries that spend a half of what is spent in the United States. So the lesson to take away from this is not in any way to take away from the tremendous power of genetics, the tremendous value of biologics, and for the individual where it makes a difference, how important it is. I think we should acknowledge the limits of these miracles and then come back to the possibilities of global health. And the first thing is we've all jumped onto this idea of precision medicine. And what I would suggest to you that precision medicine is often not as precise as we would like. And where is the precise patient anyway? We don't treat a single disease. We treat human beings. And what I would submit, you'd expect as a psychiatrist, the real challenge is actually our behavior and lifestyle. But what I want to end on by saying that action is feasible, it is affordable, and I want to say that the future is here. By here, I mean in time, it's here. By here, I mean in geography, it's here and with you. So, precision. When it started, there was a nice Time magazine article. There's a new thing called precision medicine, and Gleevec was coming out. And if there are, of course, hematologists or pediatric ones would know. So this was a new treatment that came out. It was for CML. You had to measure the Philadelphia chromosome, and if you had it, you got the drug. And it was amazing. You gave it to 2 patients with Philadelphia chromosome, and one of them went into remission. And what a remarkable advance it was. That, in some sense, is the poster child. What is the reality of some of the new precision medicine that's coming out? And of course, in breast cancer, Herceptin is probably one of the best examples. The number needed to treat to get a significant extra remission with this new precision medicine in breast cancer is actually 11 to 25. So it's better than before. It is probably more precise than before because the 1 in 63 becomes 1 in 1125, but it ain't 1 in 1. So we should use the word precision medicine, but be mindful that it ain't all the same. And if you're like the rest of us who practice much of regular modern medicine, this is the number to treat. So if you're treating high cholesterol, you're treating 20 patients with the idea to benefit 1. I treat schizophrenia, I treat 5. Now, I personally, I would say 3 or 4 of my patients seem to get better. But because of the particular aspect of medicine, it's only 1. It's the rest of the overall treatment package that accounts for the rest. So the first thing is precision medicine ain't that precise. But the second thing is, this is the reality or morbidity in populations. So if you're looking at people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, that's the number of disorders people have. The average person by the age of 80, if they're coming to you, is not a precise patient with 1 single cure. They usually have on average 3. But the point is, it's not the average person who comes up to the hospital. It is the high consumers. And they're the ones in the lower bases over there with 3 or 4 concomitant disorders. Now, what does that do? It changes the linearity of medicine. It changes the burden of this. So just looking at one measure here, which is unplanned hospital admissions. If you have 1 disorder, your chance of that on a certain scale is 2.6. When you have 2, it goes to 5.94, roughly double. The moment you have 3, it goes to 10. The moment you have 4, it goes to 23. If you have mental health issues, multiply that by 2.5. So the point is, multiple disorders come today together to create reality for the healthcare system. That is very different when you map it in a linear fashion by a single disorder. So then, of course, the thing you want to say is, well, let's just prevent this. Prevent this multimorbidity. And the question is, what prevents it? So this is probably the largest such study. It was by the Global Burden of Disease. It goes country by country across the 79 behavioral, environmental, and occupational metabolic risks that could potentially be prevented. And what you learn about that is that if the total burden of disease is the full outer circle, half of what causes it, we don't really know. So that's a burden at the moment we don't even know. But we can only address the inner half. And that's the half that's colored. And then you ask yourself, so what is that half? Most and much of it is behavioral. If it is preventable, it is likely behavioral. And then you might say, well, what does it look like for India? So these are the top 10 challenges for India. Blood pressure, fasting glucose, probably within the realm of medicine, air pollution, safe water, malnutrition. So if we are really talking about burden of disease, if we're really worried about the patients who are coming into the hospital, or if we're really concerned about what the person or the citizen sitting at home is actually suffering from, rather than what we treat when they come to our door, this is what is needed. These are complex problems. They're not easy to solve, but the question you might be asking yourself, well, actually, if we do solve them, will it make a difference? And the answer is beginning to emerge. So one of the largest studies that has been done in this regard is a Million Veterans Program. So this is a prospective study looking at 700,000 veterans who were followed from the age of 40 plus, and they've been followed for a decade now with their lifestyle habits. And the habits are the usual ones that you'd be interested in. They follow healthy diets. Now, I should differentiate this. They weren't randomized to these habits. They were just prospectively followed as they followed their life course. And at the moment, the prediction is LE8 adds about 24 years of life expectancy. The entire biologics revolution in the United States has added at the population level perhaps a year and a half. It gives you the sense of the scale of what interventions and the scale of this change. Not only this, there is another major study, and this one is in the UK through the Biobank, where now we know the genetic risks. And the question is, well, what if you have a genetic risk Do these kinds of lifestyle interventions matter? Again, I shouldn't call them lifestyle interventions. I should call them lifestyle choices, because as yet no one has gone to a group and said, I will change your lifestyle. They've given advice. People have followed that advice or not. And what you find is, yes, that the healthy lifestyle may offset your genetic risks. So that the 23andMe list that they sent me, now this wasn't necessarily the genetic risk of Alzheimer's, by the way, or Parkinson's for that point of view, but it tells you that yes, we can take on genetics through lifestyle modification. Has it been done? And the answer is yes. One can be optimistic, and this is an experiment that I know well, and I know that in India it's also beginning to work in this direction. And this is the experiment of smoking in Australia. So Australia was a country which has systematically decreased its smoking in men from about 40% to where at the latest statistics is actually lower than 10. That is a dramatic change in the rates of smoking. The question is, does it actually change the population rates of disease? Absolutely does. So if you can follow this, you can see this was the rate of smoking. So this is M tobacco. As you see, it went up. Immediately after the World War, something happened. Australians started smoking at scale. And then it took about 1970s to slowly start decreasing it. That is the rate of all respiratory diseases, including cancer, and that is the decline. In women, it is less pronounced because it didn't go up to this. So the point is, these interventions matter. Did they happen because the doctor told his patient by wagging his finger, don't smoke? No. They happened because there was a systematic national effort which was aimed at behaviors. It involved advertising and promotion. Australia was the first country to ban it. It changed the way cigarettes were labeled. Australia was the first country to do it. Changed the pricing and taxation. You've done a bit of it over here. Changed social marketing. And finally, it was, of course, creating smoke-free environments. So the point is, large-scale changes can happen, do happen. And in Australia, we did do the calculation. More lives from cancer have been saved in Australia because of this than all our specialist cancer centers put together with modern medicine, just to give you a sense of scale of what is possible. So let me end by what I think is the new kid on the block. And it was great that the PSA spoke before me because he opened this for you. I think in the last 10 years, the game changer. So if 20 years from now you'll have another graduate who gets a degree there today and stands here, they'll probably be telling you how this likely changed the world. And the potential is huge. Just in the last year, there was 10 billion worth of health venture funding, and it was wonderful and satisfying to walk in through the foyer to see your own technology and innovation programs, and I'm delighted that Professor Tucker will now be leading a discussion on this. So as I end, let me leave you with the tale of two states. One state with a life expectancy of 76 years, and that is the state of Texas. The cost of healthcare per individual, about 14,000 US dollars per year. Not a family, an individual, 14, family of 4, you can do your own calculation. It costs about 45 to 50,000 for the health of a family of 4 a year. That's why the health insurance. The other state is Kerala. Life expectancy, 77, cost US dollar 137. So when I said the future is here, it is because of the DeepSeek moment that the principal scientific advisor talked about. That you can use those Stargate supercomputers, you can try to get the biggest compute in the world, but yet it might be that the mysteries of the world lie somewhere else, that there is another way. And frankly, the 14,000 way is just not the way for India, even if we all wanted in our lifetimes. So let me tell you why here is then important. When one looks at where the future increase in health funding will be, the developed countries will only be growing at a rate of 2%. We are pretty much plateaued. The real growth will be in countries like India. And I think that is where there is an opportunity for India to show the way. Just as with UPIs, India's shown the way, you can turn around a frugal system of digital payments. I think there is a new way of thinking that's possible, and you should lead it. And I will end by saying that the miracles of modern medicine were about genetics, biological therapeutics. They've led to significant cost escalation where the countries who invented this can't afford it. And life expectancy is falling. The future of global health, I think, will be data-enabled behavioral change. It will require frugal innovation. Not the 4.5 million biologics therapy, but the 5 lakhs biologics therapy. It'll have to be community-based. And it could still provide a significant increase in life expectancy at a population level. So let me end by thanking you all for the opportunity. It's a privilege to stand here 40 years later, not much further from where I started, gone around 4 continents, and delighted to be back here. So thank you.